Thank you, and I'm excited to be here to talk about React State Management. First of all, definitely thanks for the opportunity to kind of share the knowledge. It's one of the things I really like to do. So let's roll. So the material that I'm about to cover is also part of a free Learn to Build Mobile Apps with Ionic Framework and React.js and Capacitor. It's a lot of words. Program that's I'm currently offering on my YouTube channel. So please feel free to check that out. A little background about myself. I have over 30 years in software development experience. Like Mike mentioned, I've been working with Ionic since 2014. I started my own mobile development firm called Clearly Innovative Inc. about 10 years ago here in Washington, D.C. I also teach Ionic framework through at Inclusive Innovation Incubator under this technology initiative that we have at IN3 called The Future's Written in Code. We teach Ionic with Angular, Vue, and React. A lot of people like it. We also get a lot of people exposed to Ionic who never heard about it before. And IN3 is an 8,000 square foot innovation space focused on Black and underrepresented communities here in Washington, D.C. And the purpose of the program is to increase exposure to technology and entrepreneurship in that community. It's something that's kind of been a passion project for me through the years that I'm thankful that I've been able to kind of make it a reality with the physical location and have a team to kind of do this work. So React State Management with Ionic. For people who follow me or read my blogs, you know that I'm really about just getting things done. I don't spend a lot of time on theory. I just like to show people how to solve problems that they have. And when I started with Ionic, one of the things you always saw were a lot of these questions that I have here. With Angular, it's like, how do I pass data between the tabs? How do I get my email address to the side menu? How do I hide the side menu when I'm not logged in? How do I manage kind of the routing of the pages? This whole concept of, you're taught, don't use global space. That was a thing you learned in JavaScript, and so you're always trying to find a solution to solve that. And then for folks who are transitioning over to React, it's like, what is Redux? And then you start to look at all that boilerplate and you see all these samples online and you think you have to go to Redux. React has come up with some solutions to address this problem. And I'm going to cover one of them today. And so what I'm going to talk about is how to use the React Context API. Most of the bullet points you see on here are taken straight from the React API documentation. Just put them here as a reference point. But the basic idea is context provides a way to pass data without passing props all the way down. I'm certain you've seen the word being used called prop drilling, where you feel like you create your component and you have to pass all these properties to get information passed around. The Context API is a solution to address that problem. The other thing to know is you might have seen in a bunch of examples, there's usually only one context, but it is possible to have multiple contexts. And each specific context has a specific purpose. Not covering it here, but it's just something for you to know. And the other thing that's important to know is you can use Context API with other state management solutions. In fact, in the project that I'm working on right now, I use the Context API to manage user state information, but then I use another tool called React Query to manage all my data state. Another way you might see it is if you've used GraphQL. With GraphQL, it can basically cache your data for you. It can manage your data state, but if you have other pieces of state information that you need to manage, using Context API along with React Query or GraphQL is a decent solution to use. As I stated earlier, best use of the Context API is to share data that can be considered global, that components further down the React tree might need, such as the current user, theme, or preferred language. The place that I use it most often is really to kind of manage the user authentication state and to keep track of information about the user that I might need various places inside the app. And that's kind of what we're going to cover today. And that's an extra slide. My apologies. All right, next. So the way that I look at it, to kind of put it in layman's terms, is that the context has all of the data, and the provider is how the components get access to that data, i.e. subscribe to context changes and do interesting things with it. In the example that I'm going to show right now, and also for people who want to follow along, the link there's on the bottom. All the source code that I'm going to show at the end of this presentation is available at in my GitHub repo with that link. I'm going to walk through some slides of the code, and then hopefully if there's time at the end, I'll walk through the actual code. So what we're going to do is we are going to keep track of the user information and the logged in state of the user. It's a use case or a pattern that I'm certain most folks have seen and you'll run into very often. You want to know if the user's logged in or not, and then if the user is logged in, you want to do something with that user information or that state. So inside of our context, we'll keep that user information of the logged in or logged out state. We will also include the functions that will allow you to log in and to also log out. They will be accessible through the context API. We will use the current logged in state to provide access to routes. And so a pattern that I use, and I'll show in this example, is that I only render the routes that are accessible based on the logged in state. Sometimes you'll see what people do is they will create a like a private route component, and they'll wrap all their routes in it, and then inside of every time the route is rendered, the first thing it'll do is look and see if you're allowed to have access to that route. That is one solution, but that's not the solution that I'm providing here. I'm just completely separating out what you, if you're logged in, there's only a certain set of routes that are rendered, and if you're logged out, there's another set of routes that are not rendered. And that solves a couple of other problems that I've seen people talk about in the forums, which is, how do I hide my side menu? How do I address my tabs still being visible when I change routes and all of those things? And like I said, if you want to follow along, the code is checked in up in my GitHub repo. There's the link again. I'll just pause for a second if anyone wants to copy that link down. Okay, let's get back to it. So, and once again, at the end, I'll go through all the code. I'm just trying to highlight specific pieces of the code that I think are critical that I want to explain. For those of you who aren't completely on the TypeScript bandwagon, I've tried my best to minimize the amount of TypeScript that I actually used in here so that the material can be digestible. If you're interested in the GitHub repo, leave a comment and I'll make another version where it's like TypeScript all the way through and through. The the main purpose of this slide is to kind of describe the data to you that I'm actually storing in the context so you can understand how it's laid out. And so I describe the type for that. And then it also gives me some of the IntelliSense and other things I need inside of my application when I'm writing code. So what we're storing inside of our context is an object called Authinfo. And inside of Authinfo, we keep track of if the user's logged in or logged out. Also inside of Authinfo, we keep track of the user. For this simple example, I'm just keeping track of the email address. And then since I'm not connected to Firebase or any other backend, I'm just randomly generating an ID that I need to be associated with the user also. The other cool thing that you can do with the Context API, which as I think is very similar to what you do with services in Angular, is the idea is that you wrap up everything that you need specific to that functionality, or as I say, the separation of concerns. That specific concern can be managed within the context. And so what we do here is we have the authentication info, Authinfo in the context, and then we also include the functions that manipulate that state, which are, in this example, just log in and log out. And then we, the last line you can see there on line 15 is how I actually create the context that's going to be utilized. And so now I've created the context in the previous slide, and then now here I need to actually set it up so the application can get access to the state that's stored inside of the context and the functions to manipulate the state that is stored inside of the context. So the way that you do it, that I'm doing it here is I'm wrapping the entire application with the authentication provider. And as I said before, the provider is how you provide access to the context information that is being stored. And so what I've done is here, I've gone all the way to the index.tsx file, and I've just wrapped the whole app component with the auth provider. And so that'll give me access to everything inside. The other thing that I've done to just simplify my code is I've exported this function from inside of my context TSX file, which just gives me an easy way to get access to the context. As a React hook there's a React hook called use context that if you give it a context, if you pass it a context, it will return the values from the context for you. And so that's what I'm doing with this use auth function, which, excuse me, I will show you how it's implemented in a second. So here's an example of how you would actually access the values that exist inside of the context. I believe here I'm inside of the app.tsx file. And what we're going to do inside of app.tsx, we want to control what routes we render based on the authentication state. So at the top of the file, we're going to import that use auth function I just mentioned to you from my auth context. And then right at the top of the actual function component, we're going to call use auth. And all we need in app.tsx right now is just the auth info. And so we'll get the auth info out of use auth because it was exported. And then here's an example of how I'm kind of managing access to the specific routes based on the user state. And as I'm looking at my code, I'm realizing I'm checking user email, which I shouldn't do. I could actually just check the logged in state, but it's going to give me the exact same results. So what this code is doing, it's saying if I have auth info, and if I have a user object, and if that user object has an email address, that means I'm logged in. And I apologize for this error. It really should just be auth info ? Dot logged in. And so then what will happen is if I have basically a user logged in, I will render the ion split pane component, which will give you a mobile application that has a split pane and a side menu, and then the route that we're managing is this this page with the name associated with it. And I apologize. This application that I modified is based off of the side menu template that you get by default with the Ionic CLI. My apologies. So if you are logged in, we'll render that. If you're not logged in, we have a separate route that we're going to render, which is just a login page. There's no create account. There's nothing else. It's just if you're not logged in, we render the login page. And then on the bottom, I handle the redirect situation where if you're not logged in and you just get the slash, we'll redirect you back to the login page. The same way if you are logged in and you just get the slash, we'll redirect you to the inbox page. Now inside the login TSX, not the app TSX, inside the login file, we're going to follow the exact same pattern. We are going to use auth context to give us access to the use auth function. Then we're going to use the use auth to get access to the login function. And then inside of my code, I just call the login function that's from the app context. Calling this login function, which we'll walk through the code later, if the login is successful, what it will do is it will set the auth info. It will modify the state. Since the state is reactive, it will cause the application to re-render. And when the application re-renders, on my call to history replace slash page slash inbox, it will render the side menu, the ion split pane part of the code. So that's how we handle the login. Right now, I'm going to try to go through some source code with the little bit of time that I have left here. And hopefully a combination of what I walked through at a high level and then stepping through the code now, it will kind of make some more sense. Once again, the link is available in the GitHub repo, but now let me switch over to my code. So here's my code. And as I stated, this is the basic React template. I have my developer tools open so that I can see what's going on. This is inside my developer tools, I have my auth provider, and then I can look at my context. If I look in my tools down here, you can see the, let's go over here to my auth context. If we look in my auth context, you can see the shape of my data that I spoke about early on. And then here you can actually see it in the developer tools. The auth info is undefined at this point. There's my login function. My login function, I'll reverse it here. Undefined, my login, and my logout function. When the app starts up, since my auth info is undefined, that means there's no email. If we go to the router, this does not exist, so it's rendering this login page here. My login function is very simple. It will always log you in, so I'll just put my email address. I put a wait in there so that we get the effect. And then now you can see if I look at my context has been updated, login is true. I have some user information, my email address, and my ID. Let's walk through what my context looks like. As I mentioned, I set up my type here. I create my context. And then here's my auth provider. Since in my auth provider, I'm using my state, and the state is reactive. Any changes to this state will cause the application to re-render, which is exactly what we want. And then in here, I just have my functions. I have a logout function, and then a function that we just spoke about, which is my login function. Like I said, it's dummy, so I'm returning a promise, which will always be true. I'm setting my state here, my logged in to true, and then I'm setting all of my user information. And then this set auth info, for those who are familiar with this use state hook, calling set auth info will set the tongue twister. Calling the set auth info will set the state. We will get the changes, and they will just kind of work its way through updating the appropriate components. So logout function, login function. Here's the state that's been provided to the auth context, and here's the use auth function that I had mentioned earlier. Also, the getting access to the state. Let's go to the menu. In the menu, we want to include the logged in individual's name. So you can see here, if I open up the menu, it has the name of the logged in user. It was not passed in as a property. Because as you can see here, there's no properties getting passed in anywhere. I'm pulling it out of the state. So if I go back to my menu, we follow the same pattern where we're calling the use auth to get access to the auth info. The auth info contains the user information that I want, so I can render the user information in the page. And then the log out, where's my log out? I put it at the top level page. Once again, we get access to the use auth function, which will give us access to my context. All I want to hear is the logout function. So we'll call the logout function, and then on success of the logout function, we will render the login page. Oh, sorry. And then the important thing is, as you can see here, there's no side menu. It's not there. It's not hiding. It's completely gone because I am not rendering any part of that. Because you can see it's rendered here, and all we're rendering when you're logged out are these two pages. Could someone ping me about time, because I'm not certain what time we started, and I just want to I want to know how much more time I have.
You're doing good on time.
All right, thanks. So there's a bunch of other interesting things you could do once you understand this concept of the context. As I said, the important thing to do, so some recommendations that I have around using context is to basically make sure that don't get too crazy with putting a bunch of stuff in the context. If you read more of the documentation on the React website, They talk, there's rendering issues around updating the context. So i.e. anytime you update the context, anything that's dependent upon the information that's in the context will attempt to re-render itself. There's some strategies to manage that. But still just be conscious of what you're doing. So don't get crazy and throw a whole bunch of crap inside of the context. It's really not what it was meant for. Also on the React context page, they give you perfect examples of what to do and what not to do with what they recommend to do and what they recommend not to do with the context. What else did I want to cover? The other thing that I think is extremely important is and I recommend it in all my videos, make sure you have a pretty decent understanding the Chrome developer tools, specifically with the React developer tools can really help you see what's going on inside of your application. That's one of the reasons why I kept it open here, to kind of show folks what was going on there. Another thing to be certain of is when you use the context API, make sure you use the context at the appropriate level. When I first started using the context API, I made the mistake of taking my auth provider and wrapping it at this level, and it did not work properly. It needed to be wrapped around the app so that you could get the appropriate reactivity of not Ionic, of React recognizing the changes and properly re-rendering the component. Is there anything? I think I'll stop there and see if there's any questions. How much time do you have for questions now?
We'll have a Q&A session after this, so keep on going if you want. You got like five or six more minutes left.
I didn't want to go too deep. I wanted to leave some time, since I went through the code, if there are people that ask questions specifically about the code. And so I'm open to answer some of those questions now.
Why don't we wrap up with some of the presentation then, and then we can get going with the group Q&A and going into some of the details. Okay,
then let me just wrap it up and give the final links. So here are the links to my company, clearlyinnovative.com. We're a web and mobile development firm. We work with large clients, small clients. Our largest account right now is the National Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture. Applications written with Ionic. Most of my videos that I have posted can be found at www.FIWIC, which is Future is Written in Code. Or you can just go to YouTube and Google Aaron Saunders and you'll find all my videos. I try to create a blog post for any of the videos that I create. Most of my blogs are posted at dev2/Aaron K. Saunders. There's some older content that's available on Medium, but dev2 is where most of the stuff is. I do a podcast about the conversion of technology, race, and coding. And anyone who wants to follow me can follow me on Twitter. Final follow-up, the course that I'm posting online right now about React, when I get done with this, I will circle back around and do the exact same course using Vue.js. I paused on my Vue.js blog post and coding, waiting for the official release. But I'm looking forward to that also. So thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you found some value. As I said, the source code and the deck is posted in the GitHub repo at Aaron K. Saunders. Feel free to post any questions. I try my best to be as responsive and active as I can on any code that I post on my GitHub repo, and I try to be as active as I can on Stack Overflow and in the Ionic forums. So thank you very much.